Hi everyone, welcome. What I have here is a little board with some information on it. It's just a quick summary of what I intend to do today, and I've got a couple worm bins I want to feed. One of them is already up here on the bench, and the one that we're looking at here up on the bench is the older of the two that I want to feed today. It's the 85-day-old bin. I've got another one that's a little bit younger. It's only 40 days of age, and they're actually what I consider to be my younger red wiggler systems. They're the two youngest red wiggler systems I have. I've got two other active red wiggler systems that are older. In the case of these two systems, the last time I came in here to feed them was 10 days ago. And if you've been following along, you might notice something a little different with this one, the older one. These notes over here pertain to this system over here, the second bullet point here where it talks about how the Tyvek covering was removed. This system was covered with a piece of Tyvek, which is it's a moisture-resistant, waterproof material, which actually does allow for airflow. And by airflow, it also means that it allows water vapor, gaseous form of water, to pass through it. So by using that as the covering in this system, I was finding that the material in here was getting a little bit more dry than I wanted. So I went ahead and I removed it, and I've since covered it with this piece of plastic, trying to prevent the moisture that's in the system from evaporating too quickly. A couple other notable things. This is the bin in which I've got chunks of towel, so I'm trying to compost fabric in here, as well as pine cones. And this reference to DE over here is this white powder you see. It's diatomaceous earth. DE is just the abbreviation I use for the diatomaceous earth. So I'm going to pull the coverings off here and take a look at how things are progressing in here. It was only a couple days ago that I came in here to replace the Tyvek with this piece of plastic. So it wasn't very long ago that we checked in on this. It wasn't really a check-in, it was really just a swap of coverings. And at that time I didn't take the time to look too thoroughly through what was happening in here. I just wanted the covering off of it. I really wanted the Tyvek covering because it was probably going to be a little bit more useful elsewhere. So I was in here to actually get the Tyvek to place onto what I now currently consider to be my oldest red wiggler bin. And I've really wanted that system to start drying off a little bit. And I felt that if it was covered with that Tyvek, it would allow for a little bit more evaporation. I got a pretty good quantity of food here. Definitely more than I would normally come down here with just to feed two systems. So I'm going to go pretty generous on these feedings. I've also got a good amount of paper here that I'd like to recycle, give to the worms as bedding. I've also got coffee, so I've got plenty of stuff to give these guys. Really quick though, the DE, the diatomaceous earth, was in here because I had observed all kinds of little mites crawling around the outer edge of the system, and I hoped that the stuff would do away with them, and it seems to have done so, which is great. But I'm not going to go out of my way to try to keep it on the edge here. I'm going to just allow this stuff to get sort of mixed in a little bit. You might have noticed how the plastic covering wasn't really on here very thoroughly. It was kind of almost thrown on and a little bit wrinkly. I had done that almost intentionally to allow for a little bit of airflow around the plastic. So I guess we'll judge, we'll try to decide where the moisture level in this system is now and what degree of coverage we want to provide. As I transition out of the winter months when things are very dry in the house, the forced hot air, I think, is my heating system. I think it really dries the air out significantly. But as the temperatures outside warm up and the heater in the house turns on less and less, it seems like the moisture level in the house also is rising gradually. A couple other oddities in here was the fact that I'm trying to compost bits of towel. And it's really been difficult to gauge how far this stuff is coming along in terms of its breakdown process. I've resisted the urge to really, plow my fingers through this entire system and turn things over and really get a good look at stuff, because the towel, the way I laid it in here, was pretty much all over the place, and I thought that if I started pulling out a piece of towel that it would just, make a huge mess. And it might, but I think I'm at that point finally where I'm prepared to really go deep dive on this system and give the whole thing a good till. It feels to me like there's a lot of unbroken down material lingering on the top that really could benefit from being sunken down deeper. That's part of the motivation, as well as just a curiosity to see how the towel bits are doing. There's also pine cones in here. I think the pine cones might be in these two corners. So I'm not really sure how I'm going to go about this, but I'm thinking I'm just going to kind of start plowing around and agitating the material, stirring it all together, see what we see. And along the way, I think we already know we're going to encounter certain specific items. One of them we already see here is a pine cone. 85 days of pine cone composting. Doesn't seem to have resulted in much, except for the fact that every now and then I do try to just give the pine cone a little snap, and it did seem like I was able to sort of break a piece of it. I didn't want to like chip it off, but I do feel like I busted a piece of it. You might have even heard it on the camera. And as we go deeper, this is part of the reason I didn't want to go pulling up the towel, was because if you look, it sort of continues, and I didn't want to create this big upheaval. But at this point I am gonna, because I am curious to see how this towel is progressing in the breakdown process. It's the first time I've ever composted any fabrics, so it's pretty remarkable that I've managed to resist the urge to check out how it's coming along for so long. Probably because I didn't really expect too much of a big dent being put into this very quickly. I mean, it does seem like there's a couple worms just sort of hanging on it. There's even a couple that look like they might have sort of poked themselves through it, almost making me wonder if that was just an opportunity they took for passing through a little hole that they found, or did they create the little hole that they passed through? I don't know. There's a good amount of bedding still floating around here, stuff that appears like it might have been part of the original build of the bin. And the moisture level in here, it does seem like the stuff in here is a little bit crumbly and dry. It probably will do the system some good to now have a plastic covering rather than that Tyvek covering. I think the Tyvek covering was just allowing for a little bit too much moisture loss and drying. You know, the bin's not going to really be very productive in terms of breaking down materials if it's very dry. So there's a definite advantage to keeping your worm bins nice and damp, at least in the beginning. And then, you know, later on, when it comes closer to the point in time when you might want to consider harvesting the material or migrating the worms out, it's at those later stages in the bin's life cycle when you might feel that you'd benefit from having the material in the bin dry out a little bit. This is another chunk of towel. Again, we're finding a couple worms hanging out on it. A couple little holes which I can't really account for. I don't know if they were there already or if they were holes that were created by the worms. 85 days of age. Usually when a bin, in my wormery at least, reaches the age of about 100 days old, it's usually at that point that I start considering what it might take to start driving the system towards completion. Although I could certainly see in the case of this bin, it could probably go for quite a bit longer. Maybe we will do just that. So we've kind of stirred up what we found on this side. I'm going to throw these bits and pieces of material that I unearthed over there. And we'll keep plowing through here. Oh yeah, we did feed the system down the middle, I believe, last time, and I just thought that I saw a bunch of worms hanging out down the middle. So we got a little bit of worm action happening down here. See some leftover bits of food, the stem of a banana. You can really see how the worms really enjoy getting down into the stem of the banana. They really like the insides of that thing. What else do we have down the middle? At this point I'm kind of going for a full stir through the entire contents of the bin. checking out everything basically and trying to get all the more damp stuff that's down below. Take a look at how it's doing in terms of moisture levels. And down low it's pretty good. I think it's only out on the top surface where we're seeing a little bit of excess dryness. And here and there we're definitely encountering little worm balls. I'm sure if we poke around we'll find maybe a remnant of whatever it is that's drawing them. Unless whatever that was has already been consumed, it's possible. Here, I thought this was, yeah, another chunk of towel. I actually thought that it might benefit the breakdown process of the towel and maybe the pine cones too, if they were located down in the middle where the feedings are going to be positioned once we drop in today's feeding. Another banana stem, perhaps not quite as broken down as the one we saw a moment ago. I'm just curious of larger chunks, if there may be other pieces of towel here and there. I think I tried to keep the chunks of towel that I put in here a little bit bigger for easier, you know, locating and identification later. So I might not have really shredded the towel into very small bits. If we encounter towel, it's probably going to be somewhat larger in size. Down here is the other pine cone. If I remember correctly, was it this one that maybe it was the other one that we just cut. Oops, there we go. I just snapped it a little bit further, just like the other one on the tip. What else we got down here? Pine cones, I don't know. It just doesn't seem to me like the pine cones are really doing much, if anything. We'll see how they progress. I think this stirring up of the material is going to help a lot, especially with a lot of this stuff that was sitting out on the top surface getting pretty much no attention. More banana stems. All right. Not sure what we're going to find out here, but we might as well just keep stirring, getting all this diatomaceous earth sort of mixed in with the material. I had focused the application of the diatomaceous earth around the outer edge because it was on the walls of the container where I saw all the mite activity. So I assumed that putting the diatomaceous earth right in between where I was seeing the mites and the material in the bin would almost force them to venture into it if they really wanted to try to approach the food supply. And it seems to have worked. I mean, I don't see any of those mites crawling around anymore, so that's a good thing. What do we got out on this edge? Here's another chunk of towel. This one's got a good number of worms hanging out on it, which is kind of cool. I don't recall placing any food over there. I would think that we've been feeding down the middle for a couple weeks now at least, so it's an interesting observation right there. Perhaps the worms are taking a shine to this cotton, which is a compostable material that you can put in your worm bins and they will eat it over time. It's just, you got to be patient. I've seen a lot of people, you know, compost t-shirts and stuff like that. Here's another little chunk of it. So, wow, 85 days. Usually this is the sort of attention all my bins get all the time. Me plowing through, looking at stuff, examining everything, checking it all out. So for me to have resisted the urge to do this for all this time is pretty incredible. I gotta admit, if you're a regular on my channel. So I think we've adequately stirred everything in here around. Kind of level stuff off. And even the way the plastic was covered, you know, the plastic was on here kind of wrinkly, allowing for a lot of airflow. I believe that I am going to return the plastic covering in such a way that it does actually go right out to the edges of the bin to try to limit the amount of evaporation that occurs here. I think we're good on the moisture level. I guess I was just a little bit concerned. I didn't want to see any of the material in my bins really start to get muddy. I've seen that happen in a few of my systems. And I figured if I can kind of nip that in the bud and prevent it from happening in the first place, I'd just be better off in the long run. The material's coming along quite nicely though, gotta admit. There's another banana stem. So, I've got to make a pretty good size crevice over here to add this fairly generous feeding that they're getting today. Let me bring in a number of these coffee filters that I want to do away with. I think I've left behind 3 or 4 over here. So here's about 4 of them, right? What's a good way to go about doing this? I like to shred it up a little bit into little pieces if possible and spread it around. Try to wrinkle it all up so the stuff doesn't lie flat and mat up against each other. We'll start dropping it down here on the bottom. Seems like the right place for stuff to be, where all the juices from the decomposing foods can sort of get captured and caught and suspended within this dry paper. It'll make the paper just that much more appealing for the worms to come over and eat that too. It's a pretty nice little addition of bedding materials. And I guess you really kind of have to consider the towel as bedding too, because it's just, you know, carbon food source. Bedding / carbon food source. Here's a pretty good sized piece. We'll just spread that out too. Sort of the way we had it originally. So got a whole bunch of stuff we've just returned down into the system, and we've not even added the fresh food yet today. So let's hope there's still some room in here to add what we want to give them. What do we want to give them? I got a pretty good sized chunk of broccoli that started going bad. I think this was compliments of my mom. This was just a whole bunch of carrot peelings. I had just wrapped it in a paper towel to sort of encapsulate it. Well, let's give them half of that. We'll save the rest for the other system we're going to feed today. What else do we have? More banana. Here's a tomato. Oops. Give them the tomato, give them the broccoli. Is there anything else I want to give them? We've given them some carrot. That's a pretty nice feeding. I think we've left enough for the other system here, right? Banana peel for the other system, some carrot for the other system, tomato. The other system just doesn't get any broccoli. No big deal. What else? Oh, I've got coffee. You saw coffee in the filter still over there, mixed in with the food supply that I'm going to be giving the other bin. Here I'm just going to see if I can try to deplete some of the coffee that's in this container. And that's quite a bit, I gotta say. Let's apply a little bit of grit to go with this too. Well, it's not even a little bit, it's quite a bit. I guess you know why? I've got a whole bunch of eggshells piling up. A whole bunch, I mean a lot. That I need to eventually grind down and process. And I've just got to do away with the stuff that I've got already pulverized and ground up. So I'm just going to keep being pretty generous with the grit. I'm sure the worms will appreciate that. So I think we could begin covering up here. This will be a significant change to the way the system's been handled up until now. For the longest time I just didn't want to disturb things. I wanted to leave the bits of towel, you know, undisturbed so that I wouldn't till up the entire contents of the bin. But I think we've actually done the system some good by sort of stirring everything together, kind of breaking certain stuff up too that was sort of lumped together and clumping a bit. We bought a bunch of the more damp material that was down low up higher, and also at the same time moved a lot of the dry stuff down into the material below to allow it to get hydrated and get some attention too. So this is actually looking like it's turning into a pretty nice bin. I guess my only observation here is that a bin of this age typically seems to show signs of being a little bit further along. So in a way, I wonder if just the, you know, the hands-off approach that I've been using on this system could be a contributing factor to it being this way. Maybe there is a certain benefit to airing things and mixing things and all that other fun stuff. So I pretty much leveled off the surface here, which is usually the finishing steps. And what else do we have? We're just going to start returning the coverings. Here are these pieces of leftover coffee filter. These are really just my way of indicating to myself where the last feeding occurred. Right down the middle. For a while there I was moving the feeding zone in this system around, going around from corner to corner to corner, always switching it up every go around. So during that time it helped a lot having an indicator to show where I last fed. You know, now that I'm back to just consistently feeding down the middle, it's probably not so important to mark where I last fed, but I like to do so just sort of out of tradition. Let's get this covering on, but do so in a way where it actually does better hold in the moisture in the system than it was doing before. Very cool. All right, let's go get the 40-day-old system. So, I mean, I gotta admit, to a certain degree, it is just a little bit more, I don't know, relaxing just to have a more run-of-the-mill system as opposed to one that's full of all kinds of anomalies and unusual test items and stuff like that. So getting rid of the Tyvek on that other system, stirring in all the diatomaceous earth, you know, using the pine cones more as just like a food item in the feeding zone, as well as the towel bits. Pretty much bringing that system back online as sort of a routine everyday system, just like any other system in my wormery, is kind of a relief in a way. I could just open it up in the future and feed it just like any other bin. Gotta say, the paper towel is holding up good. Must be one of those name brands that hold up to being really damp. Which is the one that you always used to see commercials where they would soak the paper towel and then place a whole cup of water on it and then lift the cup of water on top of the soaked paper towel. So this is kind of above and beyond the Call of Duty. Definitely holding up good. Oh, look at that. I saw this worm over here. I couldn't tell which side he was on. Looks like he's actually right smack in between the layers. Now deciding it's time to come out because of all the fiddling around that's going on over here. All right, buddy, just get out of there. I always worry by placing the papers off to the side while we're working that we're gonna, you know, have a worm that realizes that they don't like being over there. And then they start squirming out of view and ending up in a place where they're gonna be in severe danger because of the dryness. That's why I usually try to evict all the worms off the stuff that I'm setting aside while I'm working, even though it's for a short period of time. I'm wondering if it's worth even doing so with these chunks of cardboard. Probably just better off mixing them in as bedding at some point. So what we're seeing here is actually some stuff. What is that? This actually looks like a worm cocoon, but extremely, extremely fresh. Like it was just put here a moment ago. Just because of its very faint coloring. Because usually they're darker in color. For me to see a cocoon that's that bright and light in color, it's kind of unusual. I usually thought that they start out more of like a greenish color, almost like a yellow. Unless that's something else. Could it be something else? No, I believe it is a cocoon, but it's just very pale. Maybe it's an albino worm, lack of pigment. All right, so I think the stuff that's wrapped in this paper towel here is just a number of things that I wanted to remove from the oldest of my red wiggler bins, which is now at this point in the process of what I call foraging. So the worms are tasked with not breaking down and composting freshly added food items, but rather whatever little residual bits of scrap material remains in the system. And the thing that follows that is going to be, you know, striving towards the harvest of the material in that system. So it's meant to just focus the attention of the worms on breaking down all the little tiny bits of this and that within the bin, as opposed to nibbling on a larger chunk of food that might be still in there. So that's why I extracted that stuff, and I figured dumping it in here in my youngest red wiggler bin would be a good place for it to be. Here there should be adequate time for stuff to break down. So I'm not really following any sort of set pattern here. I'm just going with my sense of curiosity, I guess. So we kind of plowed across, but we did intercept the space where the last feeding would have been occurred 10 days ago at this point. And I really can't recall what the food items were that they received, but this is obviously a large chunk of something that was added back then. I can't really tell from its odor or from its smell. This is clearly a stem of a banana, or it's multiple stems, I guess. It's the part that ties a bunch of bananas together. Let's push things aside and first get a sense of how things look down in this feeding zone, other than those couple little scraps that we already encountered. Curious to see what else there remains from 10 days ago of the feeding. See, there's definitely worms hanging out here, a lot of bedding, leftover bedding materials. This might actually be an entire coffee filter, so we didn't shred it up into small pieces like we did earlier in the other bin just a moment ago. We just laid in those chunks of paper whole. Let's start swirling stuff around here a little bit, see what else remains of the last feeding. Bits and pieces. Certain things like the stem of a banana is going to take a little bit longer, but most of the other smaller fragments of food appear to have been consumed for the most part. All I'm finding is some of the bedding type materials that would have been laid in with the food. So that's pretty good. Here too, this is like the stem of some sort of a piece of vegetable. It's cool how they nibble away what they can, and then they keep going at it, but you know, the tougher stuff takes longer. Just kind of reveals the texture and shape of the material a little bit as it breaks down from the worms eating it gradually. So we got some worms hanging out there. I'm sure we got some more worms over on this side. Not that many though. Not really an overly crowded bin, but just enough, I guess. A good quantity of worms in the system. I guess the one thing I don't really, here's a banana peel. The one piece of information that I don't really come down here equipped with usually when I show people the age of the bins and the number of feedings they've received and all that other stuff, I should probably also include the estimated number of worms that I believe the systems have in them. Because that's also kind of a variable in terms of setting your expectations or gauging performance in terms of how much food was consumed over the past interval. Is, you know, how many worms accomplished that. Was it a huge number of worms, in which case, you know, a lot of material getting broken down really quickly is not that much of a surprise, or vice versa. If you've got a really busy bin and you're a little bit surprised at the lackluster performance of the bin, all these little things can eventually translate into being clues to troubleshoot if in fact there's some sort of trouble that needs shooting. Alright, pretty cool bin. I like the way things look in here. Still, you know, remnants of bedding materials and stuff like that. But, you know, certainly not bad for a 40-day-old bin. Things are breaking down nicely in here. So now what kind of stuff did we encounter here that we threw in the corner? I'm trying to remember. I just kind of reached over here and grabbed whatever felt like a larger object, and I threw it down here. So we had large chunks of paper. We'll just return them back down in here, but not in a way that they're crumbled up. Rather, the material have good surface area. It's not just a big jumble of stuff that can't be infiltrated. A couple other bits of food, banana stems, banana peels, and whatnot. So it's kind of where we stand with the contents of this bin. Things look nice. I guess we'll also bring back some of these slow composting items. Some of them are slow composting items. Stuff like peach pits, you know, I don't really know what to expect from plum pits. I really don't know what to expect from stuff like that, you know. It could take months. Who knows? So I'm often running some interesting kind of experimental objects in my bins, not knowing what to expect. Sometimes it's a little bit surprising. Sometimes their progress is pretty much exactly what was expected. And you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and pull back some of these pieces of paper and cardboard and stuff that we pulled out earlier, leaving the paper towel. That'll be our indicator to show where we fed. Everything else I'm just going to include as bedding for this feeding. Let's give this paper here the same treatment we did in the other bin. We'll try to fragment it a little bit, make it smaller than it is here, because they are pretty good sized pieces of paper. Nice generous amount of bedding. If you're a regular on my channel, you got to admit I've been pretty generous with the bedding lately. I used to be pretty stingy when it came to bedding, but more recently I've been doing much better, I think. I believe. I hope. Here's another piece of bedding. One more coffee filter to include, along with the coffee. Okay. I'm getting my clean hand soiled here a little bit, but not too bad. It's just coffee. I do try to keep a clean hand so I can manipulate the camera with a relatively clean hand as opposed to getting it all filthy by having debris on my clean hand. So I think we've got everything here. Let's just spread it out somewhat evenly. Still got a little bit more coffee over in that carton box too that I'd like to do away with. So let's make sure we don't forget that too. And then we'll throw a whole bunch of grit in here too. We'll be really generous with the grit again here. I'm sure the worms appreciate the grit. Anytime I add grit to my time-lapse bins, it does seem like the grit gets consumed almost immediately within a day or two. So I do believe that grit is something the worms definitely appreciate. So by being pretty generous with this stuff, I think we're doing everyone good. Just got to be careful not to breathe in the dust that comes off that eggshell, the pulverized eggshell. Stuff is super coarse, and if it gets in your lungs, it could wreak havoc. So if you're using the same type of grit that I use, the pulverized eggshell, just word to the wise, be careful with it, especially when the stuff's getting airborne. Otherwise, it's pretty much harmless, but yeah, you don't want it in your lungs, that's for sure. Nice bin. Almost unremarkable in certain ways because it does seem to be tracking in a very predictable, nice way, sort of as you would hope and expect. So I'm very pleased with that, that's for sure. All these worms hanging out over here. So yeah, we've got a nice population of worms in here. I just offhand don't really recall exactly how many. But maybe next time I put together one of these little information boards, maybe I will start including some sort of reference to show how many worms are estimated to be in each system before we begin. All right, very nice. What do we have left? We're gonna cover up here with the old super durable paper towel. It is getting torn up in places. I don't know if it was nibbled or torn by me. I like to think that it was nibbled by the worms. Actually, this half of it's holding up really good. It's this half that's really getting beaten up, right? And back on with my fancy little combination cardboard cover and plastic. Well, that was fun. Oh, I got a little bit of cleaning up to do. Maybe I'll see if I can just leave some of this material in the bin versus flushing it down the drain. I'd rather have it in my compost bin than do away with it. But that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a quick thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye.